Well, after nearly 9 hours, the crucial Reserve Bank board meeting has just concluded. The meeting at the Reserve Bank headquarters in Mumbai comes amidst a public spat between the central bank and the government. All 18 members on the board were in attendance in the current standoff over a range of issues, but the most crucial among them are about the central bank's reserves and the rules governing lending by banks saddled with bad loans. Reports suggest the RBI may look at improving liquidity and could also set up a panel to review its capital reserves. We are awaiting a formal statement from the central bank, which is expected shortly. Joining us this evening to analyze that statement as well as what we do know so far, Hasib Drabu, the former finance minister of Jammu and Kashmir, Jemini Bhagwati of ICRIA, Prabal Basu Roy and Lata here with us as well. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here. Mr. Bhagwati, let me start by asking you, because what we do know so far, at least as far as the capital issue is concerned, is that an RBI panel will look into it. You were one of the many who spoke on this channel suggesting that that is the best way to address this issue. So if that were to be part of the RBI statement, which is expected, that's good news?
Hello?
Mr. Bhagwati, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Okay, your question is that perhaps the decision of today's board meeting is to have a panel to look into the whole issue of capital and what is adequate in terms of reserves for the Reserve Bank of India. Is that the question? Because I lost you in between.
That's right, sir. That's what we're given.
I think
that is what we're given to understand.
Yeah, I think, no, that's a very positive development. I think these are technical issues, as we have discussed earlier, and I'm glad that the board meeting today has decided that if there is a technical issue, let a group of people who are knowledgeable look at the issue, look at past precedent, look at international experience, do a few scenario analysis in terms of how the situation obtains in India as of today, and then come up with a set of recommendations. So I'm delighted, and I'm very glad that the decision has been to set up a panel to look into this issue.
We are hoping that that is in fact the decision, but all we have so far are some sketchy reports suggesting that that is the case. We are still awaiting the official statement from the Reserve Bank of India. Dr. Drabu, let me come to you now, because one of the other reports that's coming in, which ties in with what we were reporting ahead of this meeting, that there could be measures from the Reserve Bank to improve liquidity, which has been the key demand of the government. What would your expectation be, given the fact that there seems to be forward movement or some sort of agreement on this front? What would you expect from the RBI?
Well, I think to start with, let's take this as a very positive thing that the meeting has gone on for 9 hours. So obviously a kind of consensus is being worked out. So it's not a breakdown of communication. I think that's a very positive development. Number two is the fact that now, for the first time probably in the history of Reserve Bank of India, that the board is engaging with the management on critical substantive issues of economic policy. We are used to a docile, if not a dormant board in the Reserve Bank of India. So I think it's a positive development again. And I believe the meeting may continue tomorrow. So notwithstanding what the final decisions are, it's not a breakdown of the communications and hence a state of crisis. I think that's a very, very important development. As regards the general sense you're getting of before the minutes of the press release comes is that a committee being proposed. I think that's again very positive, because you're not doing a knee-jerk reaction to a situation. So as was just now said, that you're looking at, let people who know this debate it, thrash it out, give a report. Let it not be an either-or situation, and let's exercise some respect and restraint from both sides, and that I think what's happened today. As regards liquidity, yes, there is a general sense, but I think what was being kind of talked about was sectoral liquidity issues. So I don't know what has happened, because personally I would be very reluctant to look at a sector-specific liquidity issue. However, there is, I don't think it's a crisis. It's eased out since September. Liquidity position is better than it was. But yes, there is need for liquidity. Bankers have been talking about it. And it's a part of the RBI's regular policy to review liquidity, and there are established measures, be it in terms of CRR or others. You could look at that. So depending on how the issue has been discussed, what the RBI's view is, how the other 18 members have reacted to it, I would imagine that some liquidity measures would be taken and would be welcome because it would ease on things. As regards the issue of PCA, I would want to see what the RBI has said, because that again is something of a very, very critical issue which should not be decided in a knee-jerk fashion, but one should look at a long-term plan of how to kind of look at the PCA, review it. And I would imagine, my view would be that one should strengthen prudential norms even as we are relaxing the PCA norms. So it has to be a sort of a package. It's not just a one-way thing. In either way, they should look at it in a long-term sense and then resolve it.
Okay. Point taken. That's extremely well-placed caution, Hasib Drabu. In fact, on the issue of sectoral liquidity, today we have some data which Credit Suisse put out, and the complaint that banks are not lending to NBFCs looks like very poorly founded. Quite the contrary, actually. The Credit Suisse data suggests that quarter-on-quarter loan growth of banks, PCA banks, stood at only 1% at the end of the second quarter, but there was a strong growth in loans to NBFCs. They now stand at 7% of the entire loan exposure of the PCA banks and accounted for 25% of the incremental loans in this quarter. So the charge that banks are not lending to NBFCs is completely unfounded and incorrect. So it must be interested quarters who are in troubled waters and who are, making these statements. I take your point that sectoral credit is disconcerting. Let me get Mr. Gopalan as well into the conversation. Mr. Gopalan, the other issue that is expected and the RBI looks like will address it is SME credit. Do you think a package is called for? Until now, the RBI normally announces packages or relaxes classification norms when there is a sudden event, like for instance GST or demonetization. On both these occasions, the Reserve Bank pushed behind the NPA classification period to 5 months or 6 months. At the moment, we're not going through anything unusual. Do you think an SME package is justified?
Well, whatever one might say about the system liquidity which is there, and there are two views about it, but then the predominant view seems to be that liquidity is really, coming into the system in a decent way. But at the ground level, if you look at, there is a number of, unorganized, micro sector and organized micro sector. They have a problem in accessing credit. There are different viewpoints. One is that the banks may think they are not creditworthy at all, and they go through so many problems which have to be tackled by the government. For instance, how the receivables are, these MSMEs are going to get. There is a system which PM has just now mentioned. Now, so the entire ecosystem for MSMEs is required to be looked into simultaneously along with liquidity provision if liquidity is not there. My information is that liquidity is a problem for micro and small enterprises at this point in time. The reasons are many. The reasons are because the banks may not want to lend to these people. That's a possibility. Then the banks themselves, the NBFCs themselves, were not in a position to get liquidity to on-lend. That is one more reason. But I have a feeling that this requires to be looked into. But it must be a package. Let us not do only one thing, fiddle with the provision coverage ratio or with the or with the regulatory forbearance for the SMEs, and forget about the other things which government has to do. If RBI has to do this liquidity for the MSMEs, they must sit with the government and make government commit to do all the things which are required for MSMEs to really flourish in this country. So there is nothing one can say that it is it's a one-way street.
Okay, Mr. Gopalan, just hold on to that thought. Professor Bhagwati, I just wanted to ask you, these are a package of things, more liquidity, probably more credit to specific sectors, a package for SMEs, a high-powered committee for capital, which probably will give its verdict in a month, and the current government itself could get the benefit of some surplus, maybe some reserves as well. Do you think all this is too much pressure from a government that has to face the electorate in a quarter or two? Therefore, does this whole thing look like a political expedient?
No, I think, this is healthy. This kind of discussion is good. It's best done, as I've mentioned before, within the four walls of a room, and hopefully that's how it will progress. I think we are getting a little ahead of the game. Let us have the full contours of what has happened today. From whatever little you have told me is, for whatever little you have told me, it's